Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Senior Religion Reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Joining me is Senior Managing Editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Peggy.
Before we start, we remind you about another way to support Mormon Land. Just go to patreon.com, where, with a donation as small as $3 a month, you can access transcripts to our podcasts, our complete newsletter, and all of our religion coverage. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. Now for today's episode. Latter-day Saint leaders seem to be concerned about what they believe is the casual, even cavalier wearing of religious underclothing by devout members. Indeed, in a recent speech, a general authority reportedly condemned women who wear temple garments only on Sunday and to the temple, and the rest of the week can be seen in yoga pants. He warned that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was planning to issue stricter rules about the wearing of garments. The standard instruction has essentially been for women and men to wear them day and night. According to a recent survey, though, some women are donning them when and where they want, and they don't, it seems, view that as disobedience or inappropriate. At the same time, it is getting tougher to find clothing, especially for women, that completely covers garments. Here to discuss the challenges in wearing garments, what some members are choosing, and what it means for their faith are Christine Haglund, former editor of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, and Laura Bignon, a Latter-day Saints scholar and research analyst at Sacramento State, where she studies domestic violence and sexual assault and has blogged about garment wearing. Christine and Laura, welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, start with Christine. How do you understand the religious significance of garments?
It sounds like a simple question, but I think right away we're into several different meanings of religious. So first, I think there's the sort of personal, spiritual meaning-making part where people regard these as reminders of their covenants that they make in the temple and as something that represents God's love and care for them. And then there's how they function sociologically to mark off a religious population, sort of make us a little bit different and weird. And then third, I think ecclesiastically within the church, they can function as a kind of index of devoutness. And I think maybe it's that third category we're mostly discussing this week in relation to Elder Hamilton's, is it Hamilton? Elder Hamilton's talk, yeah.
Do you think some people see them as safety or a protection as well?
Yes, I mean, I think that is an understanding that has been part of the cultural significance, and that is maybe fading. I think I feel like that is something that maybe my grandmother or my mother might have felt was a more significant component of their garment wearing than I ever have. I'm 50 or 54, just as an index to sort of for people who don't know what age we're talking about.
So what do you think are the church's objectives in reiterating kind of a stricter standard for garment wearing?
If it's not too rude, I'm going to quibble a tiny bit with that, with the premise of the question, because I think we're still working with very little data, just a report of one stake conference talk. And so, it's not clear to me that the church is necessarily doing anything right now. And also I, several years ago, had a special extra statement about garments read to me as part of a Temple Recommend interview. And so I think this has been a concern for a while. And, maybe we're not seeing anything especially new or pronounced, but just an ongoing concern. My sense is that people are fearful and worried about the commitment of younger members of the church. They're worried that we're losing people, or that the church isn't as central to people's lives as it once was. And this questions about how earnestly and regularly people wear the garment just go with those broader worries and anxieties about commitment and continued belonging to the church.
And do you think it's aimed particularly or primarily at women? Obviously, men wear garments too.
Yeah. I don't know. I think in moments of social transition, it's common for women's bodies and women's clothing to be a locus of concern in all kinds of ways. I suspect that because the larger anxieties about church membership have a lot to do with gender roles and sexuality and understanding of what it means to be male or female, that probably it does get gendered and focused on women more than on men. And it's more obvious, right? The women's garments are more, they're farther away from normal American clothing than the men's are, and so it's more obvious whether women are complying or not.
So, Laura, let's talk a little bit about that. With you did something really fascinating. I think it was last year. We wrote about you went on to like a Macy's website, the department store, and looked at dresses, and we'll talk about men too, but dresses and the challenges that women face when they're just shopping for clothes to wear garments. Could you talk a little bit about what you discovered?
Yeah, so it started as an idle curiosity. Some of my sisters and I had been talking about how hard it is to find garment-friendly dresses in particular. And so there were something around 8,000 dresses for sale at Macy's for women at that time. And I went through and I was like, how many of these are going to be garment-friendly? So I looked, at the length of the dress, the height of any slit, the transparency of the fabric, the cut of the neckline, the cut of the sleeve. Anything that, my sisters and I had come up with that could make garment wearing with dresses challenging. And I kind of filtered down by, what was available. And what I ultimately found was that only 8% of the dresses available for sale at Macy's were compatible with garments. And that was honestly lower than I had expected. I picked Macy's because, again, between just my sisters and I, it had a reputation as being one of the more garment-friendly big box stores. But yeah, so then I followed that up and I looked at, okay, so if 8% of dresses are garment-friendly, what about like formal wear, like for formal events? And that number was even smaller. That was only 4% of dresses off the rack.
Wow. And what'd you find for men for what they might wear?
Well, I did not bother looking. But someone, and their name escapes me. If you want to edit them in later, we can. But someone over, I think it was Feminist Mormon Housewives, did a follow-up post where they looked at the Macy's selection for men, and they found that 98% of men's clothing could be worn with garments.
So not anywhere near the challenge. So and now for both
not
of you,
comparable, no.
Yeah. So for both of you, Laura and Christine, garment styles have changed throughout the generations and sometimes quite radically, and no doubt will change again at some point. In fact, the church's official history in Saints, they make this note that the governing first presidency views, quote, the symbolism of the garment, end quote, as, quote, more important than the style. So let me ask you, given what we just talked about, what stylistic changes could be made to better accommodate, especially women wearing garments?
I can speak to that based on what I found at Macy's. Mm-hmm. So specifically what can make, in my measurement, Macy's dresses more garment friendly for women. So the biggest problems were sheer sleeves and the height of the cutout for the armholes. Most dresses, like on the underarm, they're cut too low and garments will show above them. So even if they're dresses with sleeves, they're incompatible with garment wearing. And so that was probably the number one easiest thing, is that the armholes for garments were cut a little bit lower for women. And if they stopped at the top of the shoulder, so they could be worn with modest sleeveless dresses, as opposed to requiring that extra fabric for the sleeve, that single change would have made the biggest difference for dresses that I studied.
Christine, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just say if I were running things, I think the ideal way to do it would be for us to draw the garment markings on our body every day, the way that Hindu women make a bindi on their foreheads. I think that would require some thought and spending some more time, and it would solve lots of problems, but no one ever asks me.
There's always tattoos.
Yeah. I mean,
ow.
Yeah. I mean, that has a whole other set of questions, but I do think that if it's really the symbols that we are most concerned with, there are ways we could be radically creative.
So Christine, some women have said they don't wear them regularly because of discomfort or pain. And some people think that the male leaders don't just discount those concerns. Do you think that's true? Do you think those are legitimate complaints?
Well, first of all, I think that as a society, like as a whole society, not just Latter-day Saints, that we are willing to tolerate a great deal of women's pain. We just do, as a matter of course. So I'm not sure we're all that different in that regard. My sense is that Latter-day Saint leaders mostly are squeamish, and they don't want to hear about menstruation or postpartum bleeding or yeast infections. They just don't want to talk about it. I'm not sure that it's that they don't care, as just that they can't tolerate the conversation long enough to find out what the real concerns are and what the difficulties are. And there's also, we've been studying the Book of Mormon this year, and Nephi is always talking about the women murmuring. And I think there's this sense that righteous women don't complain about anything. And so it's easy to discount women's concerns.
Can't help but wonder if there are women on these committees that are looking at the design. Surely there must be, right?
I assume so. And, I think just like in childbirth, women have a huge range of experiences. And for some women, it's really not a big deal. And for some women, it's a life-altering trauma. I suspect that women have very different experiences wearing garments too. And so, yeah, I wouldn't presume anything about the people on those committees or making those decisions.
One of the things that's stated is that, and has been stated by churches, that the garments are supposed to be worn as instructed. But it does seem like the instructions have been all over the map a little bit to many members. How do you interpret that? Laura, do you want to start?
Could you say the question again?
Well, they've been told, it seems like at times that members are supposed to wear the garments, quote, as instructed, perhaps in the temple or in what Mormons call the endowment. But the instructions seem to vary quite often as to how people have been instructed. How do you see it? I mean, what is the standard?
Well, I want to take this back a little bit to the last question too. So when I mentioned like recutting the sleeves, for example, on a garment, or like the arms on a garment, as maybe in a low-hanging fix of kind of what is possible based on what is there. I just want to say that I love the way Christine was like, but we could also radically reimagine the whole thing. And I don't want what's there to limit our imaginations in the same way kind of that she was saying. So to your question about, what is the standard? What's there? I personally am not familiar with any single unifying standard place that people are taught this is how you do it. But I'm also not sure that's a bad thing. There's so much about our church experience that is, the word people use is correlated. And I post-state that I was born after correlation. But, I'll hear people talk about the church experience maybe before correlation being tailored to individual communities and congregations, and there being a lot of that kind of making of meaning of what the church has to offer on a local level. And I think maybe what garment wearing really means, what is the standard, is one of the areas that we still maybe have a little bit of that in the church, where people are making that meaning locally for themselves within, their own minds, their families, their friend groups, their congregations. So yes, I don't know that there is one, but I don't know that that's a terrible thing.
Yeah. Christine, what about you on what as instructed, what that might mean and how it's interpreted?
Yeah. I think Laura's right that this is one place where the church hasn't fully sort of streamlined and correlated those definitions, and one place where it is largely up to women. I think it's the temple matrons who usually does the instructing in those kinds of things, and so it's just a strange space where the instructions are not fully specified, and maybe that's what is about to go away, and that will have both good and bad ramifications. It makes conformity a little more important and leaves less room for personal negotiation.
So, Laura, you studied gender-based violence professionally. Does modesty have anything to do with gender-based violence, modesty or lack of modesty?
So modesty can mean, as a word, modesty means a lot of different things to a lot of people. I wouldn't describe modesty as a theme as much as I would describe power and control as a major driving factor, right, of gender-based violence. And this is including, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, all kinds of things. And so when you look at power and control, right, one example of that is sartorial control, or like the control of people's clothes and what they wear. And so when people talk about modesty, sometimes they mean that kind of sartorial control. You need to do what we say or you're not being modest. You need to wear what we're telling you to wear or you're not being modest. And this is a gender adjacent crime. But other times modesty means humility and respect, showing deference to a universe, a God that is greater than you. And I think one of the best ways, and because that same word modesty is used in both contexts, I think it can be really hard to kind of tease apart what it is that a person means when they're actually using that word. So maybe I can give a couple of examples to kind of highlight the difference. So I was thinking about this, and these are both examples outside of our faith, two women who were born and raised Muslim. Both were raised that modesty meant, your body was covered in fabric from your neck to your wrist to your feet, and adult women would wear headscarves. One of these women, as she was growing up, found that her, she was just growing and her dresses weren't long enough and they started coming above her ankle, and she found herself getting sexually harassed all the time. She couldn't walk down the street without, the rates of sexual harassment went up, and she was actually assaulted, and her family was short on money, so it took a while for her to get those longer dresses. And she got it drilled into her mind, right? Your body is a sexual object that, unless it is covered up, will be harassed and will be assaulted. And that, to a lot of people, is what modesty means, right? Cover up your body so you don't get raped. Now going to this other woman, she grew up, again, same rules on coverage, but the way her family, her community taught modesty was, this is respect that you show to God. This is your choice as a woman to show that you see yourself as being the new thought in all things and open to him and his guidance in all things. And if you don't feel safe, and this is specifically in reference to the headscarf, if you don't feel safe, don't wear it. Right? If this, I know this particular woman personally, she lives in an area that sometimes has a lot of anti-Muslim violence, and her community is very adamant. If you don't feel safe, if you don't feel like this is expressing your commitment to God, then don't wear it. That's not what it's about. And so, and I've had some really interesting conversations with this woman and her mom, who I'm also friends with, about what that means and when they make that choice, that the headscarf is expressing that covenant, that commitment they have to God, and when it's serving a different purpose. And so it's safer, it's holier for them not to wear it. And I think the stories of these two women, for me, really spell out these two different meanings of what people say when they're talking about modesty. Is it this kind of sex-based power and control over women's bodies modesty that justified somehow in their minds as people's harassment of the first woman? Or is it the second woman, her choice to show deference and respect to God by wearing the headscarf as she felt it expressed that best for her? I hope that answers your question.
So how did these ideas about modesty, how do you see them playing out in the LDS Church?
So I think it varies. And I suppose something I should say is, right, looking again back to the stories of these women, the first women's story shows where female coverage of their body and fabric is a priority. Rates of sexual assault, gender-based violence are not different than they are in other areas, and they're often even higher, right? So this first woman ultimately moved to Denmark, and her first reaction was, how are these women walking around in shorts without getting assaulted, right? Their stories, the cultural narratives we create. I promise I will answer your question about the LDS Church. I'm just going to take it from a research perspective. So,
That's
right,
fine.
so what creates, I heard this a lot at the MTC, actually, right? The idea of like you're walking pornography if you're exposing certain parts of your body or whatever. And from a research lens, the only thing, to be really point blank, the only thing that is in and of itself on a biological level arousing is watching people have intercourse. Like the actual exposure of certain parts of a person's body is not walking pornography, except to the extent that we as a society have declared it to be. So the reason in this story, right, this first woman, these people that were harassing her felt justified in doing so was because in their culture, uncovered ankles were walking pornography. And so, oh, well, then, that suddenly makes her this sexual object. And so their actions toward her, they felt were justified. And to a lesser degree, I feel I've had certainly similar experiences at church. I remember one story that was told in the MTC about a missionary who was a woman who had a large chest, and she was wearing a button-down shirt that was perfectly modest. She reached down to grab a pencil, and an elder in her district was so scandalized by what he saw in terms of her cleavage that his impure thoughts ran away with him, and he had to be sent out from his mission. And this was told as a cautionary tale to every single woman missionary in the MTC when I was there. And this was about 12 years ago. And at the time, all of us were like, oh no, we must avoid also being this walking pornography. And then, right, I got into this field, I started reading all this research, and I was like, that was not her problem, right? She has the body that she lives in. But because, right, and especially right on a mission, there's sort of an extra layer of this sort of purity culture on a mission, right? This elder is like, oh no, maybe he was just like, he also thought, I've had this experience, therefore this must have been an unclean thing. This must have been walking pornography. I am now also sullied, right? And so both this elder and this sister are caught in this societal definition of what we have declared to be pornography. And they're both trapped by it. The poor elder didn't even serve his mission. And the poor sister had her body shamed to all incoming sister missionaries, as far as I can tell, at least until I got there. right? And so these feel like things that are maybe avoidable, knowing that we set the terms of what we consider to be sex adjacent body coverage, right? Well, those are rules that we make. And so how do we make them? What is that decision right now? That looks like garment lines. And if you're not covered up to your garment lines, plus, some extra, if you happen to be the woman in this story whose clothing fully covered her garments, but still ended up getting repeated to generations of women after her, right? Then, that is the line that we have set as quote unquote walking pornography. But it was our line to set. It was our choice to make. And that's just how we made it.
Christine, I want to talk about younger members because the general authority mentioned younger members, younger women in this case. And they seem to be, if this is something that the leaders are wondering about and exploring, they seem to worry about how younger people are wearing or not wearing garments. But these are people who are presumably then active in the church. They're qualifying to go to the temple. Could this affect retention? Could this lead to, if there's some kind of quote, extra effort on that, could this lead them to leave?
I'm not sure by itself that talking more about strict commandments and garments is going to have that huge an effect. I think this is part of a much broader set of concerns about how young people are understanding the church and committing to it. I think there's a sense that kids these days, that folks under, say, 30, understand their relationship to all institutions, including the church, very differently, and do not have this sort of sense of commitment and duty that maybe their elders did, or that, we Gen Xers like to think we have. And I think actually that Armin Moss's framework of the angel and the beehive is really useful for thinking about this problem. People will be familiar that Moss talked about the church kind of moving between these two poles. One is the angel, which he used to represent temple endowments and sort of the older, sort of more esoteric, mystical elements of Mormonism that seem weird to outsiders. And then the beehive as being this sort of industrious, optimistic, super American tendencies of Latter-day Saints. And that there's always this movement between those two. You need some weirdness to maintain tension with the outside society, because that provides group coherence. But if you have too much, then the difference from the outside world makes it too hard for people to maintain those boundaries. And it seems to me that that everyone is anxious about church membership and retention, and some people think that the solution is to move more towards assimilation and towards making things easier and more normal for younger Latter-day Saints. And other people think that the solution is to lean harder on the distinctive elements of being a Latter-day Saint. And, I certainly don't know which way is right, but I suspect that we'll see things like garments, or like the a couple of years ago, the sort of firm denunciation of Starbucks drinks, anything with coffee in it, we were reminding people that that's not okay. And those kinds of things, externally measurable markers of commitment, are going to become important because people are worried and want to see and want to have ways to test what's going on.
So, Laura, I'm going to bring in this question. The church, if the church for lack of a better word, polices a little bit more strongly, or cracks down, or whatever, amps up its discussion of how and when garments are worn or not worn. Do you fear that this could lead to judging among the membership? That's sort of what happened in your MTC example that you gave, and we know that judging, at least from Jana Reese's research, is one of the main drivers of driving people from faith. I mean, is that a legitimate fear?
I think judging is one of these things that we always have with us. These are the worst angels of our nature that we're constantly in contention with. So yes, but also yes. Like I think that's just sort of the way it goes in certain ways. That said, I think it does have the power to shape our judgment, right? How we apply that judgment to others. It's actually really interesting because so I live in Elk Grove, which is the city where this talk was given. And I remember thinking when I first read about it, I was like, wait a minute, Elk Grove, of all the things, I mean, we're not Zion, the New Jerusalem. We are not ready to be taken up into heaven, but that is not the thing that I would have chosen to say over the pulpit. And I'm not a 70, nobody asked me to, but I think, here is actually one of the few places that I have not felt that my body is scrutinized for whether or not I wear garments, right? And for, oh, how long is your sleeve? And, ooh, how does that fit with garments? And, ooh, I'm a person who dresses modestly. I would hope that and I'm a person who wears garments, and I'm a person, like, it is the kind of thing that you would think would not have been an issue so much in my experience. But this is the first place I've lived where I haven't felt that people saw my body before they saw me as a person, right? That said, I think one of the reasons for that I have felt living, again, in this specific community is that in some ways it can be hard for people to see each other at all. The pandemic hit our area as hard as it hit everywhere. And our sense of cohesion, our sense of togetherness, our sense of, maybe what we owe to one another as neighbors and friends and religionists is not particularly strong. If, again, nobody asked me, nobody has to ask me, but if anyone did ask me, the thing I would have said is maybe talk about ministering. Maybe talk about it's okay to show up for your calling. It's okay to, things that are also just these, again, very orthodox ideas of, the church as an institution. We need to be mindful of it. We need to take care of it. But yeah, I think in my personal experience, the danger of us letting go of judgment simply because we lose track of each other, we don't see each other, we don't care so much about each other. That's the pressing issue that I see. And I would love for, if judgment's going to go away, I would rather it go away a different way than that.
So what do you both think? I mean, obviously wearing garments in hot climates, really hot climates, can be at an extra level of difficulty in places like Ghana or Brazil.
To St. Louis in August.
Yeah. Asking people, but especially women, to wear an extra layer of clothing in places where it's brutally hot. What do you think? Should they get an exception? I don't know. Either of you?
I feel underqualified to opine. I don't know enough about what those cultures are like or how garments play in those areas. I do think that we know that Joseph Smith removed his garments because it was hot. So it seems like a good idea. I think Laura's example of whether wearing, covering the body is reminding you of your commitment to God, or whether it's just serving some external function, serving as a sociological marker is probably a good index. And would help us sort of think wisely about how we respond to the weather. If wearing your garments is making you sick, giving you rashes and infections, then that can't be what was intended.
And even to just look at the question itself for a minute, right? Should the church change its rules or make exceptions for what women in certain climates can and can't do? I think that's kind of the central tension that's leading to this whole discussion in the first place, right? Is it the church's job to tell everyone exactly how they can and cannot wear garments, and any exception, any not wearing of them, any accommodations for medical or climate related or, personal circumstances, cannot come through a person's own revelation, inspiration, intuition. They can only come from an ecclesiastical leader. I don't see that question itself as being particularly important, because I don't think there's necessarily any way for church leadership to know enough about every single person's individual experiences with their body, their health, their climate, their, whatever, to be able to get that answer right all the time. And for me, the question is, is it fair to ask them to?
Let me ask a question. It's been brought up a little bit, but this discussion, do you see this spilling over into other areas or topics at the church? This has been mentioned, is this just like another element of some kind of retrenchment or something like that? Christine?
Yeah, I like the way that Laura said it, that how much we're willing to leave to personal inspiration and judgment is really the bigger question. And I'm really not sure how to think about this as an element of retrenchment. It's because I'm not sure that the official instruction has changed that much since I was endowed, 30 years ago. And so it sounds different when we mention it now in the context of what we're worried about with our youth and young people. But it is still the same question, and it's that animating question in Mormonism about authority and personal revelation, and those are always in tension, and personal revelation always threatens anarchy and is scary, especially in moments where we're uncertain about the future of the institution.
Laura, did you want to speak to that? The other areas?
Yeah. I'm thinking about what Christine said. I really like. I want to amplify what Christine said, and because I think that tension is so important. And I mean, again, I'm not a leader in the church, so I don't know. I don't know what it looks like to be in that seat, looking, from that lens and trying to make those decisions. What I know and what I can see is, kind of how this tension plays out on a day-to-day basis, in my life, for my peers. And I am a millennial. I am as millennials get down to the avocado toast. And I and my peers, we have this generational need, we're stereotyped as, but I do see it, of doing what's right all the time. Whatever right is, we have to do it. And that can be good in a lot of ways, right? There are a lot of boxes that get checked. There are a lot of things that get done. We went on missions in droves, partly because of the age change and partly because it was the thing to do. And so we did it, right? At the same time, especially when there is such a clear, people call it a checklist, right? Such a clear checklist of things to do the right thing. things that aren't on the checklist, we maybe see as not as important. Who does the optional reading, right, for a class assignment? Who does the, it would be nice, who has time, right? And so things that invite that, like personal investment, personal decision making, make meaning out of this and then do something about it. It brings me so much joy. And whenever the church brings out something like that, a few years ago, it was the refugee effort, right? There was that extraordinary talk from now Elder Kieran about refugees, and the church immediately after released this wonderful initiative to do something for refugees, but there were no boxes in it. What it essentially amounted to was find something good to do and go do it. For the literal love of God and your neighbor, go do it. And I was like, yeah, I want to go do it. And everyone I knew was like, yeah, we want to go do it. Where's the to-do list? There is no to-do list. Where do we go to do this? Who does stuff like this? We don't know. Oh no, I'm going to be late for my committee meeting in my ward. I gotta go. Okay, I'll think about this later. And we drive off to the church to go to our committee meeting for whatever calling it is that we have. And the refugee effort stays in that space of a good intention. I felt the same way when visiting and home teaching changed to ministering. I saw the same shift, right? Suddenly with no boxes to check, oh, we really want to do it. And we end up checking this box, right? Because it's optional reading. It's stuff that we see a lot of value in and don't see a clear path to making good on, right? And so for me, the more the church spells out, this is how you have to fulfill this obligation, that's fine. But in a world where you only have so much time to do the reading, the more required reading there is, the less optional reading people do. And my struggle and the struggle I see among my peers is we want to learn how to do that optional reading, so to speak, that we know isn't really optional. We know it's so important, right? And I think for me, the thing that I would see being the most helpful is guidance on an encouragement to do that reading. I had to continue this sort of course syllabus analysis. You can tell I've been in school until very recently. I once had a class, my favorite class, for the reading. She gave us each week, there were 8 or 9 or 10 papers we had to read. And she was like, pick 5 and do them and come prepared to really talk about them. And you know what people did? We had the best class discussions I've ever been part of in that class, because that was where I learned essentially how to do the optional reading. And sometimes we'd get so into it, we'd keep going, right? And, the church is far more complex and, far more important maybe than a 1 semester class. But I think trying to, for people like myself and my peers who want to do it all right, seeing areas that our biggest need is maybe not as much stricter rules on how to do it, on how to execute it, as stronger guidance and support in how to think about it and how to engage with it, and how to make it our own and bring it into the world. And so, yes, if that were to happen, I think that is what I would anticipate seeing, among my peers.
All right, Christine, last question. What do you think this means for the future of the church?
I'm so glad you picked an easy question last. I think, in a way, I think this means that the future will look like the past, that we will keep trying to figure this out, keep trying to figure out how it is that we manage to live in the world and not be of the world, and where those boundaries lie is just going to be the constant struggle of figuring out. I love the way that Laura put it as sort of the checklist version of Mormonism versus the personal discernment and revelation version of Mormonism, and they're both right, and how we live in a world where both of those are possibilities, and with saints of all different temperaments is and has always been the animating tension in the church.
Laura, did you have something to add to that, or?
No, I can't say it better than Chris. I can't say anything better than Christine, but certainly not that.
Christine Haglund, Laura Bignon, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind our listeners that they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon.